Fi Night Studios presents War of Cyrus.
Chapter 2. Memories. The snow continued to swirl furiously outside as the wind fitfully howled. Dyer watched it carefully through a window. All the individual flakes moved and twisted in the air as if on their own little path, their own journey. Originally, when Dyer had arrived here in Pineveiw, he had never seen snow. In Cavilla, only the northern regions of the country had it. Dyer was from the centre, so he hadn't been very accustomed to snow until he moved here to a nation filled with humans. At first he wasn't welcomed, especially with the current political rivalries between the elves and the nation of Drailhold. However, eventually many in town had to admit that despite him being an elf, he was very good at his job. Dyer loved his work. It allowed his mind a break from the outside world, away from a world that was unjust and unfair, a world where men had to die. He carefully removed a long piece of iron from a forge. It glowed a bright orange at the end, perfect for being reshaped and curved. He placed it on the horn of his anvil, then began to slam his hammer against the piece of iron in a familiar rhythm, a rhythm he had picked up from his old forge master, a kindly older man who had taught him most of what he knew now. He remembered those days he spent learning how to forge weapons of steel, days spent in the Cavillian army, days long gone, like many of his friends who had signed up with him. He could still remember the day the Drantar army had ambushed the elves near Elandiriel, the day so many died. He took a sharp breath. His rhythm interrupted as he dropped the hammer and the piece of iron. He grabbed his wrist with one hand and tried to make it stop shaking. So many memories he wished so badly he could forget forced their way into his head. Eventually, his mind settled on one: the day his forge master counted on him and the day he had failed him. One particular image, one of his old forge master cowering before a group of drow warriors, stuck in his mind. He remembered gripping a sword, watching the drow approach the older man. He remembered the look in the forge master's eyes when he saw Dyer. A look of hope. Then, one of the drow had turned around, spotted Dyer, and Dyer had run away, leaving the kindly man to his fate. Dyer knelt on the ground, hands pressed up to his head, wishing he could banish the memories from his mind, wishing he had done something to protect the man. He had run away from the military and travelled to Drailhold, specifically to this little town on the edge of the known world to start a new life, one where he could leave behind the memories. He hadn't realized that no matter where he went, those memories would follow him. You could never escape your past. Dyer slowly looked up at the piece of metal that was now on the ground. It was no longer hot enough to be pliable, and unfortunately it would have to wait. He stood up, walked to the cabin's front door, put on a wool coat, and strode out into the blizzard. Thankfully, the wind blew against his back, almost like it was propelling him forward. His feet crunched softly in the snow, every footstep leaving a long trail behind him, extending far back to Dyer's cabin. It was only half a block until he reached a 2-story log building, his destination. It was called, affectionately, Dead Man's Tavern, run by a man who the people called Bartender Graves due to the fact that he was the town undertaker. Originally, the owner had protested both names, but they stuck. Eventually, he just gave in, and the business actually flourished due to the creative name and theme. It just goes to show that people around here were very, very strange. Why go to a perfectly normal tavern when you can go to one themed around dying? Makes perfect sense. Dyer knocked firmly on the wooden door and waited. A few moments later, it swung open and Dyer strode into the tavern. The tavern had a roaring fire going, making the room comfortably warm. 4 circular wooden tables were spread out across the room with a small bar on the right. Dyer nodded thanks to the man who had opened the door and sat down at the bar, waiting for the bartender to come out of the back room. The man, after closing the door, walked to the corner of the room and picked up a lyre. Then he began to tune it one string at a time. A bard. Don't get very many of those out here, Dyer thought to himself. The back door opened as Bartender Graves noticed Dyer. Graves was a towering giant of a man with large muscles and an eye patch over his right eye. He approached Dyer and simply remarked, "It's haunting you again." to which Dyer replied with a slow nod, not meeting the bartender's gaze. Someone knocked on the door, and the bard walked over to open it. 2 people entered the tavern. One appeared to be a guard wearing simple, unadorned chainmail armor and a helmet that covered the man's head but not their face. He had brown hair and eyes and a square jaw and looked to be in his late 20s. The other was a woman with blonde hair and stark green eyes. Both took a seat at a table a distance away. The bard walked back to the corner of the room and continued tuning the lyre. "Look, I like you, Dyer, I really do," Graves said, recapturing Dyer's attention. "So I'm going to tell you something that I don't tell most. Drinking won't help. It's just going to make things worse. I've seen it time and time again. Good people like you, when they drink too much, lose their lives." He stopped talking, waiting for a response from Dyer, who after a moment of drawn-out silence quietly mumbled, "You don't know what it's like," and continued to stare at the bar top. Graves sighed and reached under the countertop procuring a mug and walked into the back room. Dyer ran his shaking hand through his hair. The truth was he didn't like ale or mead, but they would temporarily make him forget about his past, make it go away for a time. His gaze shifted to his left where the bard was sitting, and his eyes locked with him. The bard quickly looked down and continued tuning his instrument. How long was that going to take? Dyer was no musical expert, but it seemed like tuning a lyre shouldn't take this long. Graves returned with Dyer's ale, setting it down on the bar top and stated, "Please reconsider, Dyer." Then he turned around and walked into the back room. Dyer was about to take a sip of his ale when the guard who had entered the tavern earlier shouted, "You're... what? After all we've been through? Does this not mean anything to you?" After this, Dyer couldn't help but also hear the woman's response. She said, "Look, okay? You're just... well, you. I don't know how to describe it. It's almost as if you believe that you're the greatest man alive, which makes it really hard for me because you are so focused on yourself, I can't compete." "That doesn't even make sense," the guard said, taken aback by the women's words. "I'm obviously paying attention to you now, am I not?" "Only when it's too late," she remarked, standing up and putting on her coat. "Maybe now you'll learn that other people's feelings matter as much as yours do." She then walked out of the tavern and out into the blizzard. The guard stood up looking as though he might try to stop her, but then the door slammed shut. The guard then remarked angrily, "Infuriating women," then walked over to the bar and sat down next to Dyer. This made Dyer extremely uncomfortable. He had his own problems. Couldn't this guard see that? Apparently not. As the guard remarked, "None of them make any sense. 1 minute they're perfectly fine and the next they blow up out of nowhere." The bartender walked out to the bar and noticed the guard sitting there. He then grabbed another mug, went into the back room, and returned with it full, setting it down in front of the guard. The guard took a swig from the mug and then said, "The name's Jonathan. What's yours?" Dyer hesitated for a moment and responded tersely, "Dyer." Jonathan thought for a moment and then stated, "Dyer... Cindergaard? They called you Cindergaard, right? Some elven tradition or something. You're the blacksmith, aren't you?" Great. More memories, Dyer thought to himself. He had in fact been called Cindergaard while in the Civilian army. No matter what it seemed, life wouldn't let him forget. Why couldn't he just be left alone? That's all he wanted. To be alone. And to forget. Was that really too much to ask? "Yes, I'm the blacksmith, and I was called Cindergaard," Dyer remarked coldly. "How did you even know that anyway?" Jonathan chuckled. "Rumors spread like wildfire, my friend. Nearly everyone in Pineveiw knows that." Wait, what else did they know about Dyer's past? Dyer thought, suddenly concerned. "I must be going." Right. Say, you wouldn't happen to have any spare change for a guard's mug of ale, would you?" Dyer sighed, feeling for his bag of coins he kept with him but couldn't find it. Wait, what? He always carried money with him no matter where he went. Could it have been stolen from him? Who would have taken it? His eyes narrowed as his gaze rested on Jonathan. "So, I'm guessing that's a no," Jonathan remarked, noticing Dyer's glare. "What did you do with my money, you thief?" Dyer shouted, standing up from his chair. "What do you mean? I didn't take your money," Jonathan retorted. "Sure you didn't. Who else could have?" "I have no idea, but I'm a guard. My job is to prevent theft, not cause it." Dyer thought for a second and realized he was being unreasonable. It was very unlikely that a guard took his money. He probably just left his money at home unless... He turned around to face the bard, who was somehow still tuning his lyre. No, that would be ridiculous. The bard never came anywhere close to him. "Well, it appears we are both out of money and have a tab to pay," Jonathan remarked, staring at his mug of ale. At this remark, the bard set down his lyre and walked over to the bar. "I believe I could help." "We don't want your help," Dyer curtly replied. "Oh, but it appears you do. I have a problem that you two could solve, and you have a problem I could solve. You see, I recently learned that there is a woman who owns a bakery only a block away named Maria. Her father went missing 3 months ago. She has an old map that shows some of the potential places he could be." "So you want us to find him?" Jonathan interrupted. "What's in it for us?" "Well, first I would pay your tab. That way you both wouldn't have to deal with the legal repercussions of theft or fraud. Secondly, there may be some financial compensation." "What type?" Jonathan questioned, obviously hesitant. "How does 10-crowned Ethereum sound?" Dyer felt his jaw drop. That was, a lot of money. It would take him 6 months of blacksmithing just to make that much. Jonathan, however, shrugged. "How do I know that this money is real? And that you're not just making it up?" At this, the bard reached into his coat and procured a pouch of money, opened it, and sure enough, the crowned Ethereum was there. Each individual coin with its crown symbol emblazoned on the gold coin, with small rubies set inside the coin. Only nobles ever carried them. How'd the bard get his hands on this much money? "Here, even take one as an early down payment on your services," the bard casually remarked, flipping one with his thumb to both Jonathan and Dyer. Jonathan caught his mid-air while Dyer watched the coin land in his lap. 10-crowned Ethereum, enough to finally build a new life. Enough to go somewhere where his past wouldn't follow him. Enough to start over. Dyer couldn't comprehend this. This was an opportunity like no other. He couldn't pass this up. "Ah, I see we're all in agreement," the bard remarked with a grin as he walked over to the front door. "The other 9 coins are yours once you complete your task. Meet with Maria tomorrow. You can turn back if you really want, but something tells me you won't." Jonathan suddenly remarked, "Wait, why do you care about Maria or her father? What's in it for you?" The bard's smile disappeared off his face as he remarked, "Because if someone doesn't care, who will?" And with that, the bard opened the door and embarked into the blizzard. Dyer's jaw clenched. He didn't want to get caught up in something else, didn't want to fail again, but the weight of the coin in his hand felt like the weight of 1,000 unsaid words, of things he could never take back. Finally, he stood, tucking the coin into his pocket, his decision made. Whatever this was, it was a chance. Maybe his last.